Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, both those of us who are together in the hearing room and those who are following us online. Before asking Mr. McGregor to lead his first witness, who I think will be Ms. Liane Edwards, could with Mr. McGregor's help, could I just flag up some points on timetabling, looking at, and I'm grateful to Mr. McGregor for thinking ahead and seeing the consequences of how witnesses are to be fitted in. If legal representatives could have regard to the at least possibility and sort of hold themselves ready to sit perhaps at 9:30 on certain days. Now, Mr. McGregor, I think you've indicated that the Thursday, the 4th of May, Friday, the 5th of May this week, and Tuesday, the 9th of May next week, may be days where we need more hours, or we might need more hours. Now, I'm taking in information you've given me and other information from the solicitor to the inquiry. Have I sort of got that right?
Yes, I think in terms of additional time, I wouldn't anticipate needing to sit on past 4 o'clock either today or tomorrow. I think there's a possibility that Thursday and Friday may both be full days, so it may be worth investigating whether there could be 9:30 starts those days, or equally a possibility of sitting on slightly after 4 o'clock. And I think the same for Tuesday, the 9th, whereby it's Miss Goldsmith and Mr. Cantley. I think if there could be investigations as to possibly a 9:30 start on the 9th, recognising that we might need to sit on slightly after 4, that would be beneficial to make sure that we finish within the indicated.
Right, so if I could ask legal representatives to plan their week on that basis, and sure, Mr. McGregor will be happy to deal with any particular inquiries. Well, with that, by way of preliminary, I ask that Miss Edwards be brought in. Good morning, Miss Edwards. As you appreciate, you're about to be asked questions, Mr. McGregor, the Deputy Counsel to the inquiry. But before then, I understand you're happy to make an affirmation. I'd ask you just to remain seated where you are and repeat these words after me. I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that I will tell the truth,
I will tell the truth,
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but
Thank
the
you
truth.
very much, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you. You are Liane Edwards.
That's right.
And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. You should have a paper copy available to you. If there's any portions I want to take you to, they should come up on a screen in front of you. For anyone following in the electronic bundles, the statement is in bundle 13 from pages 260 to 273. The content of that statement is going to form part of your evidence to inquiry, and you're also going to be asked some questions by me today. If at any point you want to refer to your statement to refresh your memory, please just do let me know. I'd like to begin by just asking you some questions about your qualifications and your career. You tell us at paragraph 2 of your statement that you're an architect employed by Multiplex Construction Europe Limited. Can you just explain to me what your current role is with Multiplex?
My current role is Deputy Project Director.
And what does that involve?
It's quite a varied role. It involves effectively acting as a number 2 to the Project Director. I can deputise for them as necessary. But I carry out a range of activities depending on the project and the stage of project, but it's a managerial management.
So a management role as opposed to doing any particular technical aspects of an individual project.
Correct.
Could you tell us in your statement that you qualified as an architect in 2007, is that correct?
Yes.
So from 2007 to 2014, when you joined Multiplex, you're working as an architect, is that correct?
Well, I've been a registered architect for 16 years for the duration of my career, and that remains the same. But my career has really been in two halves. The first half working in private practice as an architect carrying out technical work, but the latter part as a management role with the main contractor.
So 2007 when you qualified to 2014 when you joined Multiplex, effectively working as an architect doing technical work, and then from 2014 onwards still working in the construction sector, qualified as an architect but performing a management role in construction projects.
That's correct.
I want to move on and ask about your specific involvement in the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neurosciences. You tell us that you joined Multiplex in 2014. Did you start working on the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People immediately when you joined Multiplex?
Yes.
Okay. And am I correct in thinking that when you joined in 2014, that IHSL has already been appointed as the preferred bidder with Multiplex effectively being the building contractor for the project?
Yes, the appointment was made in March 2014 and I joined in June 2014.
So again, just so I'm understanding things, you wouldn't have had any involvement whatsoever in the production of the tender documents, is that correct? No. And you were involved in the period from preferred bidder in 2014 through to financial close and beyond? Can you just explain in terms of whenever you come in working for Multiplex to work on the project, told us in general terms it's a management role that you would have, but what specifically are you doing on, I'll just call the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People that project. Yeah. What is it you come in to do on the project?
I was employed as a design manager, and I was one of a team of design managers that Multiplex had assigned to the project, and I oversaw the architectural development of the design by our design team.
Okay, so the inquiry's also heard from Mr. Hall. Was he someone else from Multiplex you were working with?
That's correct.
What was Mr. Hall's role on the project?
He's what we call the MEP design manager, so he oversaw the process in relation to mechanical, electrical and plumbing.
So again, just so I can understand things, effectively, do you have the same role as Mr. Hall, albeit you're dealing with architectural issues from a management role and he's dealing with mechanical and electrical engineering from a management role?
Yes, and I think I described in my witness statement, I described myself as an architectural design manager, because that best sums up the aspects that I was looking at.
So if you're doing the management, who's involved in the technical aspects that you're overseeing? Is that in-house people with Multiplex or is that external subcontractors that you're dealing with?
So we had a design team appointed who carried out technical for us.
And when you talk about managing those external groups and bodies that come in, what entities is it that you're involved in managing at this stage in the project?
At this stage in the project, architecture, HLM architects were the architectural designers. So I liaised with them through the project.
You're dealing with HLM specialist architects. The inquiry's also heard that Multiplex engaged with an entity called TUV. Yes. Were you aware of that? Did you have any direct involvement with TUV Sud on mechanical and electrical engineering issues, or was that a colleague of yours that would be dealing with those issues?
It would be Ken Hall who would deal with them technically, but I would attend design team meetings where they were present.
I'd like to move on and just ask you some questions about a concept called an environmental matrix, which you mentioned in your statement. Was that a document that you'd seen, that type of document, a document you'd seen in your previous career when you were working as an architect from 2007 to 2014?
Yes, I had an awareness of an environmental matrix.
And again, you just explain in general terms what your understanding of an environmental matrix was and how it would be on a project, not specifically the project we're talking about, but a project of that nature?
The environmental matrix is a tool which allows you to see every room within a building or group of rooms, and it is essentially a table which covers all of the environmental aspects of each room in one document. It's often used in Excel format, and it's an easy way to interrogate and see a range of information in one place.
And in your experience in a large project, who is producing an environmental matrix? Would it be the party that was putting a contract out to tender, or would it be a party that was bidding to win a tender?
My understanding is that it can be either. There's not one set answer to that.
Okay. And in your experience, again, I'm thinking particularly the point that you're working in industry as an architect, 2007 to 2014, who is producing the environmental matrix? And by that I mean, is it an architect, is it an engineer, or is it someone else?
It would typically be an M&E engineer, either obviously appointed by the client or a contractor, depending on contractual setup, but it would be an engineer who prepares that type of document, definitely not an architect.
And you mentioned that it's got a lot of technical information contained within it. Again, could you just explain your understanding? What's the purpose of the document? So it collates a lot of technical information, but what's its purpose?
Well, it's an engineering document which allows engineers to work with the design parameters or understand how the building needs to be designed to accommodate the criteria that's set out within that matrix.
In addition to an environmental matrix, within your statement you've addressed the concept of room data sheets. Can you explain your understanding of what are room data sheets?
Room data sheets are typically approximately, they can be 10, 15 pages long, and they cover all aspects of an individual room within a hospital building. So in theory, you can take the room data sheet for a room and you can understand everything about it from within that data sheet.
And again, just so I can understand things, in terms of production of documentation on a large scale project, you've mentioned the environmental matrix, you've mentioned the room data sheets. What tends to come first, or do they get produced at the same time?
I don't have enough experience to be able to say what always comes first, because I don't think there's a standard answer to that. But room data sheets are, in my experience, generally viewed as the briefing tool.
Sorry, I missed that. Entirely my fault. Yeah.
Room data sheets are typically understood to be the briefing tool.
Thank you.
And when you say that, just so I'm being absolutely clear, do you mean that is what an entity that was looking to procure someone to come in and construct would provide to the tenderer, as opposed to a document that a tenderer bidding for a contract award would produce?
Yes, because they provide the briefing information for the hospital.
It's, again, just so I'm being absolutely clear, and in fairness to you, if we could look at your statement, it's within bundle 13. It begins at page 260, but if we could look to paragraph 19 and page 263, please.
Yes.
You've got paragraph 19 in front of you. You say, my understanding is that room data sheets are normally used as a briefing tool by the health board. This was not, however, the case on the RHSC project. You see that? And again, just for completeness, we'll look on to paragraph 49, page 269 of bundle 13. Say, in my experience, these are typically provided as briefing documents to contractors and their design teams by the ultimate client. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, it's not a matter of dispute that on the project that there weren't room data sheets that had been produced by NHS Lothian. Were you surprised by that when you became involved in the project?
Yes.
Why were you surprised?
Because in my previous project, I knew that they had been used as a briefing tool, so I hadn't ever questioned that until I arrived on this project, and there weren't any in existence.
And again, you mentioned that they're a standard briefing tool. They're not available in the project when you come in. What potential implications did that have for the project?
I think firstly, there's not one collated set of briefing information then pertaining to the room types within the hospital that can be referred to understand exactly what is required. In this instance, there was the environmental matrix, but there wasn't the room data sheets to tie the two together. And by that I mean the room data sheets cover activities which happen within a room, and a full understanding of what the room is intended to be used for. And they could include the environmental data assigned to it, so you see all the information together. And whereas the environmental matrix, although you can see all the environmental data listed room by room, won't have the accompanying room data and type.
Did you have any concerns about that information not being available to you when you became involved?
I was, at the time, I had come into the job and I had really already started, so it was a case of really assisting to prepare us for financial close. It wasn't really something that I saw that had to be questioned. It was just really a case of get on with the job and keep momentum.
Okay, thank you. If I could just ask you to have it in front of you, the environmental matrix that was provided with the procurement document. So that's in bundle 4, page 132. And it's just to look at the guidance notes. Were you provided, I appreciate that you weren't interrogating the technical information within the environmental matrix, but I'm correct in understanding from your statement you had physically seen a copy of the environmental matrix when you're working on the project?
I had seen it. I don't have any technical input or carry out any work in relation to the environmental matrix, but I knew it had existed and I have seen that document.
It's just, I want to ask you just a couple of questions about the briefing notes, so the guidance notes, and guidance note 1. It says this workbook is prepared for the reference design stage as an easier reference tool to replace ADB, RDS, M&E sheets for the environmental criteria elements as described in these sheets. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you have any discussions with Mr. Hall or any of your other colleagues about what was meant by the term prepared for the reference design stage?
No.
Did you know when the reference design stage was going to end and what was going to come after that?
Yes, and as much as we were working towards financial close.
So again, just want to be clear, you're understanding the reference design stage effectively going to close at financial close?
Yes.
Thank you. And there's a statement there that this document, the environmental matrix, had been prepared as an easier reference tool to replace the ADB, RDS, M&E sheets. Did you have any discussions with Mr. Hall or anyone else as to whether this was a helpful or easier reference tool as opposed to room data sheets?
I didn't have discussion specifically because I can agree that in terms of analysing environmental data, because you're seeing all the environmental data side by side on environmental matrix, it can be perceived to be an easier way to analyse M&E data.
Now, one of the things that had to be produced by financial close was room data sheets for 100% of the hospital. Were you aware of that? Now that didn't happen, and we'll come on to discuss that in a moment. But really, what I want to ask you about is within your statement, you mentioned that your understanding is that room data sheets would reflect an environmental matrix. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Just want to ask you a couple of questions, because if room data sheets are normally produced as a briefing tool, as you mentioned, would it not be the other way around, the room data sheets populating the environmental matrix, or was that not the way things worked?
One informs the other. So if there had been room data sheets fully populated to begin with, I anticipate that at some stage in the job, someone would extract the environmental data from the room data sheets to create an environmental matrix so that they could carry out specific M&E related tasks. In the instance that an environmental matrix exists first, at some point that criteria, that data is extracted back into the room data sheets. It is not advisable to have both running concurrently because you could give rise to error. One advances before the other. You have to be specific about what point you bring the two documents together and exchange the data.
Okay. So again, just so I'm understanding things, if you had room data sheets, those room data sheets would populate the environmental matrix. If you've got an environmental matrix, your understanding is that that data would then be used to populate room data sheets.
Can be, yes.
The next issue that I want to ask you about is the project management group. You tell us about the project management group within your statement from paragraph 21 onwards. Can you just explain what the project management group was?
It was a weekly meeting. I think it was weekly at that point. It may have been fortnightly, but it was the coming together of kind of management teams from each of the stakeholders to assess how things were going in the various work streams that we had, and issues could be escalated. It sat in the kind of hierarchy of meetings. It sat at the kind of highest level, at project level, and if there were issues there, they could be escalated beyond that. I think the steering board meetings. But really, we were dealing with issues coming up from the more granular and technical meetings.
Okay. So you'd have the people doing technical issues, they could then refer that up, and then if matters couldn't be resolved at that stage, that they could be escalated further than that.
Yes, and I think it was looking at kind of week-to-week progress on matters.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned within your statement the concept of user group meetings. What were user group meetings?
User group meetings were a programme of meetings that ran for around 3 months, and the idea of them is to help progress the design from what teams would refer to as a 1 to 200 exercise, which shows rooms within departments in the hospital. But the idea of the user group meetings is to get each room developed in detail, populated with all its equipment in the right place. And the way we did that was to work with teams of clinicians by department on a rolling programme to review the design being proposed and the population of these rooms, and listen to comments made by clinicians and adjust the drawings if necessary to accommodate what was required or requested.
Okay, so again, just so I'm understanding things, user groups, clinicians are attending, and it's aimed at progressing the design. Now, when you're talking about the design, are you talking about the architectural design as opposed to the technical design of things like mechanical and electrical engineering?
Yes.
So would I be right in thinking that there wouldn't be any engineers that were attending these meetings?
No.
And again, could you just explain why not? If it was important that the clinicians met with the architects, why wasn't it important for the clinicians to meet with the mechanical and electrical engineers?
I don't know the answer entirely, but certainly the clinicians that we dealt with were the clinicians who are medics within the hospital. They are not people who I believe understand necessarily the kind of technical aspects around the room. They are the ones who are treating patients, so it's out with their scope to comment on technical parameters within a room.
Okay. The only reason I ask this is the inquiry is also going to hear from individuals from Wallace Whittle TUV Sud at a later stage. One of the things that Mr. Macrae, who works for TUV Sud, says he said he had never been involved in a project of this nature before, whereby he hadn't effectively had direct discussions with clinicians. Are you aware of there being any of those direct type discussions between clinicians and those that had been engaged to assist with the mechanical and electrical engineering, or would that simply be out with your scope of knowledge because you're dealing with the architectural issues?
Correct, I was dealing with the architectural issues, but no, my understanding was that there was a technical team appointed by the NHS to review technical aspects, or these technical aspects of the design.
I appreciate that it doesn't seem that this did happen in terms of clinicians having direct discussions with mechanical and electrical engineers, but do you think that would have been something that may have been helpful to take place on a project of this nature? I'm not talking specifically about the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People, I just mean projects of this nature in general.
I think it would depend on the brief. In this instance, there was a clear brief in terms of the environmental matrix, so I'm not sure what the direct contact with clinicians from a technical perspective would add to that.
So again, just make sure I'm understanding things from your perspective as someone who manages projects of this nature. If there was perhaps a general or unclear brief, you think it would be helpful for that type of discussion. But if there was set parameters that had to simply to be built, you wouldn't think there would be any point in that type of discussion taking place. The next aspect that I'd want to ask you about is the level of input that you received back from both NHSL Lothian and their technical advisors, Mott MacDonald in particular. If I can ask you to have your statement in front of you again, so that's bundle 13, page 267, at paragraph 39. Page 267, paragraph 39. You tell us in your statement, as part of my role in the project, I also oversaw the production of the PCP project code proposal document. If we just pause there, what was the project code proposal document?
These were the suite of documents which we were required to prepare in response to the board's construction requirements that demonstrated that the design had developed in line with the BCRs.
Okay, so I'm understanding the board construction requirements, that is the requirements, and then project code proposals are the response that comes back to those. Yes. Thank you. Return to your statement, you say, this was not something I'd done in the previous healthcare projects I'd worked on. I managed them through the process of being drafted by our design consultants, reviewed by the board, redrafted in light of the board's comments, and resubmitted to the board. Did not comment on the documents technically, instead managed and tracked the process. Multiplex had our technical design consultants employed to prepare the information, and the board had their technical teams to review the content of the information. The board and their team were involved in the preparation of the PCPs. Do you see that?
Yes.
What I'd like to try and understand is the volume and detail of comments that Multiplex IHSL is receiving back from both NHSL Lothian and Mott MacDonald engaged as their lead technical advisors. Can you just explain your understanding of what's coming back by way of comments?
There was very detailed comments came back regularly on the documents. There was no set template or standard for what a PCP should look like or cover. So our teams drafted what we believed satisfied a demonstration that we'd met the BCRs, but probably 10 out of 10 times the board's, well, the comments, the board's comments were always returned via Mott MacDonald to us, and they were very detailed comments that continued. So documents had to be redrafted multiple times. The suite of document was about 35 documents, so it was a meaty process.
Because the inquiries received a series of witness statements from Mott MacDonald, and their description of what they are doing at this stage in the process, from preferred bidder up to financial close, is that it was a very light touch approach whereby they were doing simply some sample reviews of matters. Was that your understanding of what Mott MacDonald were doing at the time?
Absolutely not. No, they commented on everything. There was pages of comments. Sometimes we had to meet them to understand the comments that were made, and they were extremely detailed. They wanted a lot more detail than we thought was necessary included in these documents. So I would not agree with the comment that it was a light touch approach.
Your colleague at Multiplex, Mr. Hall, described Mott MacDonald at this period in the project as acting as akin to being a shadow design team. Do you have any observations on that comment Mr. Hall makes?
I can understand why he would say that, because Mott's had a member of their team for every discipline that you could imagine required by the project. So architecture, fire, acoustics, mechanical, electrical, helipad, every discipline was covered. So they were able to analyse every aspect of the project design as it progressed.
Now, you mentioned, I think, in the response to the question, and you also tell us within your statement at paragraph 1 that Multiplex's view was that effectively what NHSL Lothian and Mott MacDonald were asking for was a lot more detail, certainly than Multiplex and IHSL were intending to provide at that stage in the project. Could you just expand on that a little? Like, what was it they were asking you to do that you thought was unreasonable at that stage of the project?
Well, in my mind, the board's construction requirements were in place. They stated what we were required to meet as a brief, and more than a brief, as the requirement for the project. So by confirming that we were going to meet these aspects of the BCRs, often that felt like it was sufficient. But they wanted to know in minute detail exactly how things might be achieved, which took time. Took time to continually add that detail, which wasn't necessarily, we felt, relevant.
And I think one thing that'd be helpful to understand is why it's not relevant, because you think to a lay person coming to a project, they might think that at this stage actually having everything covered off and having a huge amount of detail might be helpful. Why wasn't it either relevant or helpful to have that level of scrutiny at that stage of the project?
Well, it depends what aspect of the project you're looking at. But if I use an example of a cladding material, for example, if you know what the material is, the colour, where it's going to be on the building, and how it performs basically to meet the BCR, that would be sufficient. But for example, they would look for, you know, how many screws and how long the screws were going to be, and exactly, you know, what shade of blue the cladding was going to be. You know, one could argue that some of these were not necessarily relevant at that point. The information would come in time. And there's varying degrees of detail that you can go to on different aspects of the building, but we felt that we were giving them a fair understanding of how we were going to meet the BCRs, and we were committing, obviously, to meet the BCRs.
And the request is you saw it for a very granular level of detail at this stage. What impact did that have on the project and the timescale to financial close in particular?
It's time, because that's what you're trading off. You know, the more detail that you want to achieve in a project, the longer it takes to achieve that. And at some stage, teams, people, you know, managers need to make a decision on what point or what kind of milestones they want to achieve.
We've spoken already about certain of the requirements that were set out in the procurement documents and things that had to be achieved by financial close. So one of those requirements was for IHSL to produce room data sheets for 100% of the hospital by financial close. Now, it's not a matter of dispute that wasn't achieved. Why wasn't that achieved?
Partly because of time. The preparation of room data sheets is a time-consuming activity, but it wasn't relevant either, because we were able to produce 100% of the room types. So actually, they could see what they were going to receive and what the hospital was going to perform.
So were you surprised that that requirement wasn't insisted upon by NHS Lothian before financial close?
I don't remember how I reacted to that at the time. It didn't seem reasonable in the time period available to prepare 100% of room data sheets. There was still a 1 to 50 process, which is the user group process. That was ongoing throughout the summer, and you can't really start to produce these room data sheets because they didn't exist at all. Couldn't start them until we had finished a process of design.
And in terms of that decision not to have 100% room data sheets, was that a decision-making process you were involved in, or was that something for other people within Multiplex and NHSL Lothian to decide?
At that time, it was for others more senior than myself.
Okay, and on the Multiplex IHSL side, who would be involved in those types of discussions?
Well, the person who sat above me at that time was John Ballantyne.
John Ballantyne. I could ask you to have in front of you, please, within bundle 8, page 54, please. Which should be a set of minutes for a project management group meeting on the 27th of August 2014. You see those?
Yeah.
Sorry, my fault, Mr. McGregor. This is bundle 4.
It's bundle 8.
Bundle 8.
Bundle 8, page 54.
Thank you.
This is a set of minutes from the project management group meeting on the 27th of August 2014. We see the attendees set out, which includes yourself, Liane Edwards, a range of other people attending, including Graham Greer from Mott MacDonald, Brian Curry from NHS Lothian. It's really over the page, entry 2.8 at page 55 that I'd like to ask your observations on. So entry 2.8, there's a statement, LE, so Liane Edwards, advised during a review of the environmental matrix, number of discrepancies have been uncovered impacting on RDS production, and requested input from IHSL to raise RFI. Do you see that?
Yes.
Again, the inquiry's heard from, or has statements from a number of individuals on the multiplex side who considered that their understanding was that the environmental matrix was effectively a fixed brief. That was effectively what you were being told, this is what I want, and this is what I want you to build. Can you just explain, why was there a review being undertaken to look for anomalies if what you'd been provided was a fixed brief from a client saying this is what I want?
It was not a review looking for anomalies. It was an activity that HLM had at this point concluded the 1 to 50 exercise. So they were now preparing the agreed list of room data sheets. And as we talked about earlier, they were now extracting the data from the environmental matrix into the room data sheets. As they do that, they were finding some discrepancies which were really about consistency, and they were highlighting through me, so that I was aware, but they were highlighting them to the MEP team just to question them. So as an example, 10 storerooms have a ventilation rate and an air change rate, whatever, of a number. The 11th storeroom has something different to all the rest. It looked unusual, it was inconsistent. So HLM would just raise that as part of a kind of due diligence as they were extracting the data. At this point in the job, and throughout the job, in fact, we were in a really collaborative environment. So I was aware that this conversation had begun within our team. I attended the project management group meeting, and I just highlighted it as really out of courtesy to the board that there potentially were some questions to come back to the board about the brief. I didn't know at that point volume or time. I just raised it as part of our kind of collaborative approach to make them understand.
Okay.
There's a discussion ongoing.
So just so I'm understanding things correctly, the review that you're talking about there, that's a review that's effectively undertaken by the architects, HLM?
I don't think a review is the right word to use. They're extracting the information and just highlighting things that looked inconsistent.
Okay. At that stage, is there any similar process being conducted by Wallace Whittle TUV sued on the mechanical and electrical engineering aspects?
I couldn't comment on that and oversaw that aspect.
That would be an issue for Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Hall. But again, just thinking back to this concept that there's a review and there's some what's described here as discrepancies that are being spotted. Did that have alarm bells ringing on your part or the part of Multiplex if what you thought you had was a fixed brief, but it doesn't appear that it 100% complies with some of the published guidance that you've talked about? Was that a concern on your part?
HLM were not reviewing the document for compliance. They don't have a remit or the ability to interrogate for compliance. Best word to use is consistency. They were highlighting matters of inconsistency.
And again, at this meeting, whenever there's a courtesy, you raise the issue that there might be issues whereby there's discrepancies or non-compliance within the environmental matrix. What was coming back from individuals from NHS Lothian and Mott MacDonald? What were they saying in relation to these discrepancies being flagged?
As I recall, they accepted the comment and understood that there may be questions to come.
Was there any discussion at this meeting or meetings of this type about you don't need to worry about that because what we've provided in the environmental matrix is a completely fixed brief that you need to follow? Do you remember any discussions of that nature?
Not specifically to the environmental matrix, but the general view we often got back was we know what we want. provide it to us. We've been through it. But because I wasn't providing specifics on the things we were questioning, I don't suppose anyone was really in a place to say any more in any detail. It really was just a note for the meeting that time.
Again, just I think in fairness to you, so that you get to put your full picture across, the inquiry is going to hear from Mr. Greer from Mott MacDonald later this week. He's provided a witness statement, and his recollection of events is that the IHSL were being told by Mott MacDonald that the environmental matrix was a document that they had to develop, take responsibility for, as opposed to the idea of it being a fixed client brief. Were you ever privy to any discussions like that involving Mr. Greer?
No, I wouldn't have taken part in any discussions. I may have been at meetings where he talked along those lines, but I wouldn't be party to the conversation itself, myself.
So again, just to be fair to you, you don't recall any such discussions taking place, but if they were taking place, you wouldn't be the right person for Mr. Greer to be making those comments to.
No.
Now I want to ask you about the period at financial close. And again, the inquiry's understanding is that the environmental matrix gets included within the contract as reviewable design data. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Were you involved in any discussions around the environmental matrix becoming reviewable design data, or was that a decision for others to take?
It was a decision that others took. I was just aware of the decisions once it was made because I was tracking the ECP process and just the general week-to-week status. I was aware of things happening because of my attendance at meetings.
And from your role as a project manager, did you have any concerns about the environmental matrix being reviewable design data at financial close?
I think not, in the respect that we had a clear number of comments that were to be addressed post-financial close, and as I understand, update the environmental matrix to reflect the comments that were included in the contract. I understood that was agreed and didn't have rise to question that.
Throughout your career, have you ever been involved in another similar project whereby an environmental matrix has been reviewable design data at financial close?
Can't recall. The only other project I've been involved at the relevant time was the Glasgow Hospital. I can't recall now whether that was or was not.
Okay. The reason I raise it is, again, the inquiry is going to hear from Mr. McKechnie from Wallace Whittle TUV Sud, and his position, and again, this is on the mechanical and electrical engineering side, he had never seen that happen before, of an environmental matrix being reviewable design data, and he describes that process as potentially being dangerous from a commercial perspective, because the party that contracts to do the build of the mechanical and electrical engineering system wouldn't know at the point they're contracting and agreeing a price exactly the parameters of the system that they have to build. Is that something that you would have any views on, or is that really something that it's really for mechanical and electrical engineers to comment on?
Yeah, I think I would revert to my M&E colleagues on that one.
I could ask you to have in front of you, please, bundle 4, page 218. Bundle 4, page 218. This is a document headed Environmental Matrix Comments from the 13th of October 2014. Do you see that?
Yes.
Have you seen this document before?
Yes.
So can you just explain what is the document?
The left-hand column is a list of comments made by the board that were being discussed, and the right-hand column is the IHSL response to each comment.
And again, we could just check, this is comments that are flowing ineffectively. Are you involved in this in terms of the management of the document coming in and making sure it goes to the right people to review, or are you involved in the process of these discussions?
I'm not involved at all in the technical discussions surrounding these. If the document came to me and didn't include Ken as my relevant colleague, I would simply pass it to him. But more often than not, he would be included anyway.
So if we look over the page, the top of the page on the left-hand side, you'll see a comment, further review and development of the environmental matrix is required. Do you see that?
Yes.
You would be aware that there had to be further development of the environmental matrix, but you wouldn't be involved in the technical details of how the environmental matrix was to be updated. Is that right?
Correct.
We see here effectively a range of issues that required to be resolved. If we could just look on to the contract itself, please, bundle 5. If we'd start at page 869, please. Page 869, we see that the non-approved project code proposals, design data and comments. Is this effectively items that became reviewable design data? And if you don't know, please do just say.
Just refreshing myself. Yes.
I could ask you then to look on, please, to page 880. You'll see the second main box there. We see the environmental matrix being included as reviewable design data. Do you see that?
Yes.
And we see a number of the comments that were effectively raised by the board in the previous document we looked at being included as reviewable design data. If I could ask you to look down to the fourth bullet point on the right-hand side. So we've got the box on the far left, environmental matrix, 2 boxes over, we've got the bullet points. 4 bullet points down, there's an entry, detailed proposal awaited on bedroom ventilation. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says detailed proposal awaited on bedroom ventilation to achieve balanced stroke negative pressure relative to the corridor. Were you aware that there had been an issue in relation to bedroom ventilation and pressure in particular in the period of financial close, or was that something that Mr. Hall was dealing with?
Again, I would be aware that there was a discussion ongoing because of the nature of the meetings I was attending, but not involved at all in any of the technical resolution or discussion on any of these items.
From a project management perspective, were you surprised that by financial close, issues like that hadn't been bottomed out and resolved?
It's difficult to say because I didn't have enough understanding of the issues to know if that was typical, not typical. I knew that we were on an accelerated financial close programme. So in the round, wasn't surprised that there would be some items for further discussion.
One issue again that crops up in witness statements from various witnesses is the volume of reviewable design data on this specific project. Are you in a position to comment whether you thought that that was more or less than you would have anticipated on a project of this nature?
It was more than I was expecting. For the reasons that we spoke about earlier. Some of the detail I think was anticipated was more than would been normal or necessary.
So just so I'm understanding things, the level of detail full stop was more than would be expected, or the level that gets pushed into the reviewable design data process is more than you'd have anticipated?
Possibly a touch of both, but bearing in mind I was concerned with the architectural side of things at that point, so I can't really comment on M&E items and that
Again,
aspect.
just so I'm understanding things, if I sort of summarise what I'm taking from your evidence, that there was more reviewable design data than perhaps would have been ideal, and that was really because there was the pressure to get to financial close by a certain period. If you'd had more time, there could have been less reviewable design data.
Potentially it stands to reason, yes.
The next document I'd ask you to have in front of you, please, is in bundle 10 at page 283. This is a document headed Healthcare Associated Infection System for Controlling Risk in the Built Environment, often referred to as HEI Scribe by other witnesses. So this is an HEI Scribe report from the 19th of November 2014. Have you seen that document before?
Yes.
Were you involved in the HEI Scribe process that resulted in the production of this document?
Yes.
Could you just explain to the inquiry the nature of your involvement? Why are you, as project manager, involved in a healthcare associated infection system review?
We were made aware of it, I think, with relatively short notice of the meeting itself taking place. I don't recall really having much of a brief of what would be required or anticipated. So it's a process, it's an NHS process that they go through. So I was invited to attend the meeting, and the meeting, it turned out, is a review of questionnaire required at certain stages of the process. It's really for NHS to complete. I think we're invited to assist them with their decision making on how they complete their own form.
And were you provided with a copy of the form at the end?
Not at the end of the meeting, you know, a day later or something.
Yes. So within a reasonable timescale of the meeting taking place, you're shown a copy of the report. If we could just look within the body of the report, if we look to page 285, section 2, is headed consultation, and we see the second entry in the table, design manager stroke IHSL, Liane Scott Edwards. Is that you?
Yes.
And then if we look on to page 286, we see entry 2.2. Is the ventilation system design fit for purpose, given the potential for infection spread via ventilation systems? And it's ticked as no, with the comment being some concern has been raised in relation to a potential issue with ventilation with regard to negative stroke balance pressure in single bed rooms, waiting drawings and further information to fully understand if there is a risk stroke issue. Do you see that? Now, at this point, we're in November 2014, the feedback that's being provided from NHS Lothian is that at this stage the ventilation system design wasn't fit for purpose. As an individual managing the process, did that give rise to concerns or have alarm bells ringing on your part?
Well, people who attended the meeting, with the exception of Colin Macrae, were not people who were involved in the technical resolution of M&E systems. So when it came to this question, I think there was discussion because multiple people in the room knew that a discussion had been ongoing, and it was suggested that it hadn't been yet resolved. There is only a yes or no answer, and the view that the NHS took was couldn't be yes because they weren't sure that discussions had been concluded. So the only other option is no. And I accepted that. I didn't necessarily dispute that case. But I was surprised because I thought the discussion had potentially been closed by now. But Colin Macrae didn't confirm that it was closed, so comment was added, and we moved on. It certainly wasn't the forum that the issue was going to be discussed in technical detail or closed.
Again, my understanding is from the fact that the environmental matrix goes in as reviewable design data, that this issue that's flagged within the HEI scribe report, that's not resolved by financial close. Was that your understanding?
It looks to be the same comment, which ended up in these bullet points, which were to be included after financial close. So in that sense, I agree.
So again, just so I'm understanding things, by the time financial close is achieved, there's an outstanding issue in relation to whether the ventilation system design is fit for purpose or not.
I don't think the two correlate quite like that. I don't think that the bullet point as it listed in the table that we just looked at, suggesting that the system is not fit for purpose. Equally, they didn't revisit the high scribe pro forma. I think it was only visited once. So I don't think there was the opportunity for them to upgrade their answer to 2.2 in the high scribe pro forma.
The final issue that I would want to ask you about, and it's really a general point of drawing on your experience working in the industry. NHSL Lothian's position before the public inquiry is that there was an error, simple transcription error in an environmental matrix. Doesn't get spotted. Do you think there were any issues during the procurement exercise leading up to financial close that could be done better in future projects to try to avoid that type of issue if it did cropping up in the future?
Well, obviously I wasn't involved in it at all, but as you're asking for my opinion, I understand that they'd undertaken a large exercise previously to establish their brief for the hospital, and that they didn't want to lose the work that had been put in, because it does take a lot of work from technical people, specialists, clinicians, whoever, to decide what the brief is. They mandated that in the design, and I don't think it would be unreasonable, given that they'd gone to the extent of compiling the matrix, that it should be reviewed technically by their own technical team prior to making it a mandatory element of the design. They need to make clear what the brief is. A way that they could have done that would be to produce a full suite of room data sheets as is intended by their own guidance. Room data sheets are there as a briefing tool, and they allow you to see the activity within the room, the purpose of each room type, and the environmental data associated with it. And if that full suite had been produced as a full briefing document, perhaps some of these issues may have been picked up. Brief should have been clear.
Thank you. Ms. Edwards, I don't have any further questions for you at this stage, but Lord Brodie may have questions, or equally there may be application from core participants, but thank you for answering my questions today.
Thank you.
Mr. McGregor, no, I don't have any questions at this time, but what we'll do is we'll rise for about 10 minutes or so. I'll ask you to be taken back to the witness room, and this gives the opportunity of the legal representatives to consider whether any questions arise. I will then ask that you come back, and either if there are questions, you'll be asked these questions, but if there are no questions, I'll confirm that to you. So if Ms. Edwards could perhaps be taken to the room. We'll take about 10 minutes to allow people to consider whether there's any questions.
Please stand.
Now, my understanding from Mr. McGregor is that no questions arise, and therefore what I propose is that I will ask the witness to rejoin us. Apparently, coffee has not been made available yet, but is now, or has not previously been made available, but is now available. And therefore, it would seem appropriate to allow people a coffee break until, let's say, 20 to 12, and we can then resume with Mr. Macrae. So if I could ask Ms. Edwards to be brought back. Ms. Edwards, there's no further questions for you, but can I thank you on behalf of the inquiry, not just for your attendance this morning. Giving evidence to a public inquiry is not just a couple of hours of a morning. It requires preparation and work, which you have carried out. I'm grateful for that. You're now free to go.
Thank you very much.
We'll sit again at 20 to 12.
Please stand.
Mr. Macrae? Good morning, Mr. Macrae. As you understand, you're about to be asked some questions by Mr. McGregor, who is the counsel to the inquiry. But first, I think you're willing to make an affirmation. If you would, sitting where you are, simply repeat these words after me. I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
that
I will tell the truth,
I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the
and
truth.
nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. McRae. Now, Mr. McGregor.
Thank you. You are Colin Macrae, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've provided a witness statement to the inquiry. A hard copy should be available to you if you need to refer to it.
I have a hard copy here.
I'll also bring any documents you need up to see in front of the screens in front of you. For anyone that's following in the electronic bundles, your statement's available in bundle 13 from pages 7 to 54. Now, Mr. McRae, the content of your statement is going to form part of your evidence to the inquiry, and I'm also going to ask you some questions today. If I just begin with your career, which you set out from paragraph 1 onwards of your statement, you tell us that you retired in March 2020, is that correct?
Yes.
And before that, you were a mechanical engineer and a chartered engineer in building services and a member of the Engineering Council.
Yes.
And you worked for Mott MacDonald laterally. How many years did you work for Mott MacDonald for approximately?
I think it was about 8 years.
And what was your role when you were with Mott MacDonald?
Building services engineer.
And for those of us that don't work in the industry, what does your role involve on a day-to-day basis?
Basically, I specialised in hospital design, construction, anything from mechanical, electrical, medical gases, telecommunications, data. It's all rolled in to one job.
So you mentioned that it would involve mechanical and electrical engineering design work, is that correct?
Yes.
And in addition, you tell us at paragraph 2 of your statement that that would involve what you refer to as reviewing operations and design information.
Sorry?
You mention it at paragraph 2 of your statement that your job would also involve reviewing operations and design information. So
Yes.
part of your job on certain tasks would be doing the design, but is what you're telling us at paragraph 2 almost the flip side, that you could be in a different role, effectively reviewing design information?
Yes.
So if you were in that role of reviewing design information, just at a practical level, what would you be doing?
You get documents submitted, design proposals, project code proposals, and you would be going through them to see what was being proposed and seeing whether it was fit for purpose.
You mentioned within your statement that you had quite a lot of PFI experience during your career.
Yes.
Again, can you just explain what do you mean by PFI projects?
Private finance initiatives. The first one I did was King's College Hospital in London, where I took it over from the builders and did the maintenance regime for the hospital, both breakdown and planned preventative maintenance.
So that was King's College. So what were you doing? Were you doing the design work, or were you doing the reviewing of the design work?
That was the first PFI I was involved in, and it was the day-to-day operation of the hospital I was working on. Then I go from there. I went to some 5 schools for a while. Then I went to the BBC in Glasgow to take the Pacific Quay building over from the builders and take it through technical fit out. I then went from there to Balfour Beatty and the Fife Hospital Phase 3, where I was part of the SPV,
And what do you mean by the SPV?
the special purpose vehicle for the procurement of the PFI.
And on that project, are you working for the procuring authority or are you working for the bidding contractor?
For the bidding contractor.
Thank you. You tell us within your statement at paragraph 5 about your experience of the breakdown in projects of this nature when they're being scored between price and quality. Can you explain what your understanding of a standard price quality split would be for the types of projects that you worked on?
It varies between projects, and quite often it's 60-40. But I mean, it's not something I have ever been involved in because I'm doing the mechanical, electrical engineering side of things. I very rarely get involved in the project management.
So you'd have seen the documentation that set the scoring criteria, but you're not necessarily involved in advising on setting that criteria.
Definitely not.
But again, just so I'm understanding, in your experience, it wouldn't be unusual to see a 60-40 split between price and quality.
No.
And again, today's not a memory test, so perhaps just in fairness to you, if we turn up your witness statement, is bundle 13, page 8. Bundle 13, page 8. You see on page 8, there's the bold heading just above paragraph 5. The assessment criteria were based on a mix of price and quality with a 60-40 split in terms of price and quality. In your experience, was this unusual? And you can tell the inquiry this was a normal.
Excuse me a moment. Can I switch on my phone and turn up my hearing aids, please?
Yes, please do.
And I've just realised I've not brought my glasses for computer work. Switched it off. Okay, see if that's been better.
Are you able to hear me all right?
I was struggling, so turn these up and it should be okay.
Well, if there's any issues, please just do let me know, because I can either keep my voice up or we can look to kind of alter the technology.
Fine.
So if there's any issues, please just do say.
Yeah.
So I was looking at it just above the bold heading, paragraph 5. The assessment criteria were based on a mix of price and quality with a 60-40 split in terms of price stroke quality. In your experience, was this unusual? You say this is the normal way to assess these projects.
Yes.
The split of price and quality may vary. The decision would, however, have been taken at a high level by NHS Lothian. I had no involvement in the decision. But
Yes.
Again, in your experience, although you haven't advised on what the split should be, you've worked on other projects where there was a 60-40 split that was fairly standard. So
Correct.
when you came in to work on the project for the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People, would it surprise you to see a 60-40 split being set out in those tender documents? In the healthcare PFI projects that you talk about, could you assist the inquiry with what type of briefing documents would you see a procuring authority providing? I'd specifically be interested in your views about concepts the inquiries heard about room data sheets and environmental matrices. What was your understanding of the sort of standard briefing documentation that would be provided by a procuring authority?
It can vary, and it depends on the detail. I think trying to think what happened in Fife. I think because I've always worked with an environmental matrix. Every PFI I've done, it's always worked on a environmental matrix. I think in Fife, the design consultants produced the environmental matrix, and that was taken forward. It is the standard way, and it's only the engineering aspects of the room data sheets that go on to the environmental matrix as a quick and early means for the mechanical and electrical designers to get started before all the architects got all the layouts done. It's just a faster way of doing it.
Because other individuals that have given evidence to the inquiry have said that the standard briefing tool would be room data sheets produced using the activity database system. That's what would be produced by a procuring authority and provided to tenders. Is that not your experience in the projects you have worked on?
The projects I've worked on, there may have been, because the architects produce the room data sheets and they have the tool for doing that. I'm purely on mechanical and electrical, and rather than working with the masses of pages that room data sheets produce, it's split down just to the environmental matrix as a summary of the details that are on page, I think it's page 3 and 4 of each room data sheet. So it's just a summary, and it allows the mechanical and electrical designers to start work in a quicker, more efficient manner.
So again, just so I'm understanding your experience from a mechanical and electrical engineering point of view, on a large-scale revenue-funded PFI project, you wouldn't be expecting to see room data sheets produced using the ADB system. You would be expecting to see an environmental matrix being produced and provided to prospective tenders.
Correct. But the environmental matrix is, the source information comes from pages 3 and 4 of the room data sheets.
So you would still be anticipating that the information within an environmental matrix would come from room data sheets,
yes,
but the physical room data sheets, the large stack of room data sheets, wouldn't be provided to the mechanical and electrical engineers at the tender stage of a project.
And if the architect changes a layout, changes the room detail, adds a room or deletes a room, then that has to be, he would amend his room data sheet, but he must tell the mechanical and electrical that that room's been altered so that the environmental matrix can be adjusted so that it's in line with the room data sheets.
Again, we'll come on and talk in more detail about the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and your work there, but it's not a matter of dispute that at the tendering stage, room data sheets for every space in the hospital weren't produced. Presumably, from what you're telling the inquiry, you weren't surprised by that when you came to work on the project because there was an environmental matrix?
I wasn't surprised, no.
If I could just ask you some questions about your involvement within the project, and by that I mean the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People and the Department of Clinical Neurosciences. What time commitment on a weekly basis did you have when you came in to work on the project?
When I started, it was 1 day a week. And as it progressed, I could do some additional work in the Glasgow office. I was generally only through here once a week. Some weeks I didn't need to come through, there were no meetings. And then I could do other work in the Glasgow office.
For the 1 day a week that you're working on the project, what were you doing?
Oh, it would vary from looking over PCPs, basically going through documents. They would just be passed to me to review, or I would be attending meetings.
And who would pass information or tasks on to you?
Well, initially it was Maureen Brown, latterly Camille. He only was ever referred to by me as Camille. And basically, he would give me documents to review, and I would review them and give him back any comments that I had.
And at this stage, are you the only mechanical engineer from Mott MacDonald that's working on the project, or are there other mechanical engineers?
There was other. I took over from Paul Curry, who was dealing with the early stages, because he was moving on to other projects. And I basically took over from him.
You took over from him, but were you the sole person dealing with reviewing mechanical engineering issues?
No, obviously, I would ask other people in the office to look over things, because Mott MacDonald have a thing where it's a check and approve system, that somebody has to go over responses so that it's a second check of what's been commented on.
So anything that you're reviewing, you're not the sole individual reviewing that, is that correct? And in relation to the 1 day a week that you're working on the project, you mentioned that there's a raft of issues that you'd be dealing with. Approximately how much time would you be spending on ventilation related issues?
Oof. Ventilation, probably 10% of my time.
So you tell us that you joined the project when it was at the competitive dialogue stage.
Yes.
So competitive dialogue, as the inquiry understand it, is the period up to the appointment of a preferred bidder, and then you have the period from preferred bidder to financial close when the contract's concluded. Okay. But at that initial stage, from the point of competitive dialogue, you're obviously being provided with individual tasks, but at a practical level, what is it that you're doing on the project at competitive dialogue?
It didn't really change. I was just reviewing documents and what was being bid. So we did have sessions where we discussed the different proposals from the different bidders.
And did that change from the point that the preferred bidder is appointed to financial close, or were you simply doing tasks allocated to you by
I
other
was simply
individuals?
doing the tasks allocated to me.
One of the issues that's covered within your statement is Chief Executive's Letter 19 from 2010, or Cell 19 2010 as it's often referred to. You tell us within your statement that wasn't on your radar at that time. So when you were working on the project, is that a concept that was mentioned by anyone on the Mott MacDonald side?
I wasn't aware of that letter.
Presumably you weren't looking at tenders or any of the documents that you were being asked to review with Cell 19 2010 in mind?
Correct.
Do you know if there was anyone else working for Mott MacDonald that would have had that issue, Cell 19 2010, on their radar?
I subsequently have obviously looked it up, and it's an NHS policy document. I wouldn't be able to comment if anybody else was looking at that.
If I could ask you to have your statement in front of you, please. So it's bundle 13, and if we could look to paragraph 8, please, which is on page 10. See paragraph 8 beginning, while I cannot recall. You say, while I cannot recall all the details, at draft final tender and tender stage, I'd be asked to review technical submissions from a mechanical and electrical perspective. In reviewing the bids, I'd be focusing on what the bidders were proposing to design as a solution for the facility as a whole. I'd be looking at the proposal not just from a ventilation perspective, but also from the point of view of factors such as heating, medical gases and lighting. By that early stage, the design had not been developed yet. Therefore, I would not be looking at whether there was compliance with SHTMs or with the many other applicable sources of guidance. Similarly, I would not be assessing compliance against the draft environmental matrix, as the environmental matrix was going to be the bidder's document to develop. Do you see that?
Okay.
Now, if we go back and perhaps just pick a few of those issues out. You tell us that at this early stage, the design hadn't been developed yet. When would the design be developed?
It's an ongoing process, and subsequently there can be a number of changes in the design process. I just see that it's an ongoing process, and the design development. I mean, at financial close, the environmental matrix had theatres missing. It had a clinical department missing. So that's all to be developed.
And at this stage, you wouldn't be reviewing any proposed solutions for compliance with published guidance, such as Scottish Health Technical Memorandum 0301?
I would be looking at it, and at that stage, when it was at the bidder, the tender stage, it was comparing the proposals from each of the bidders, and it wasn't a compliance, it was a comparison, as I remember it. But it's so long ago, the detail, difficult to be precise.
That's completely understandable, but one thing I want to understand is you're obviously being asked to review documents, but whenever the tenders come in, so it's at the tender assessment stage, one of the things that is set out within the procurement documentation, the invitation to participate in dialogue, the invitation to submit final tenders, is there's reference to various published guidance, including SHTM 0301. But when the bids come in, you weren't looking at the bids to see if there was compliance of a solution with that technical guidance, because as I understand it, you're saying it was just too early to undertake that type of review.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So again, just so I'm understanding, is that a general policy across Mott MacDonald that no one would be doing that because it would simply be too early a stage?
It's probably not Mott MacDonald, it's my personal view that if the design's to be developed, it's the project co-proposals are basically in draft form at that stage.
But at that stage, in terms of people passing you work to do, was anyone asking you to review any particular of the tender bids for compliance with published guidance, such as
Not that I
SHTM?
can remember.
And do you remember having discussions with any colleague that would be carrying out such a task?
As far as I can recall, the reviews that we did in group sessions, so that it wasn't just the mechanical and electrical, it was architectural, it was the construction, it was right across the board in a group.
So again, just so I'm understanding that, you don't recall any of those types of discussions about whether there was compliance with published guidance such as SHTM 0301. But if that was taking place, you would expect to be at the meeting where such issues were being discussed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Macrae, it's entirely my fault. Could you just take that last question and answer? I realised I hadn't really picked it up. My fault.
Yes, my lord. So, do you want me just to paraphrase my understanding of what Mr. Macrae had said, or do you want to go through the issue again?
Sorry, we're on paragraph 8. Sorry. I've just lost concentration.
I had simply been asking Mr. Macrae about paragraph 8. I'd been asking about what task he was asked to do. Mr. Macrae, as I understand it, told the inquiry that he wasn't checking it at this early stage when tenders were being assessed for compliance with SHTM 0301. I then asked Mr. Macrae some further questions about the process. Mr. Macrae's answer to that was that at that early stage there were group meetings that took place. So he doesn't recall any assessment being undertaken of tender bids complying with SHTM 0301.
That last point.
But if such a discussion had taken place, it would have taken place at those group meetings. So as I understand it, his position is that he doesn't think anyone from Mott MacDonald was undertaking that assessment of whether tender bids were complying with published guidance such as SHTM 0301 at the assessment of tender stage. But again, no doubt Mr. Macrae will clarify if my paraphrasing is right or
Well,
wrong.
that's correct.
Thank you. As I say, it was entirely my loss of concentration.
Mr. Macrae, the next issue that I want to ask you about is really just still within the stage that tenders are being submitted before a preferred bidder is being appointed. And within your statement, you make some comments upon a tender that was submitted by a bidder called Bidder C. So that's a different bidder to IHSL that got appointed. Like, do you have, appreciate it's a long time ago, do you have any recollection of the process and reviewing the tender bid that was submitted by Bidder C?
I'm afraid not. I just can't remember.
It might be helpful just to jog your memory, just to put in context some of the questions I'm going to ask you if we go and look at some of the documents submitted by Bidder C. But effectively, Bidder C submitted an environmental matrix, but they changed a number of the figures within the environmental matrix itself and made some comments within their tender. At the time, would you have seen those documents, or would they not be the type of documents passed to you?
I can't remember. I do know that it was brought up that bidder C had marked up an environmental matrix. But my perspective, my view on that was that was bidder C being proactive, marking it up prior to appointment as preferred bidder. It was something that has to be developed again in the process. So it didn't give any alarm bells that bidder C had been proactive.
So if bidder C has marked up different values, taken the environmental matrix issued to bidders and marked up different figures, that's not something that would be of concern to you or having alarm bells ringing at this early stage?
No.
And again, just so I'm understanding, can you just explain why not?
Why? Because bidder C has taken the stance of carrying out that work. The other bidders would have to do it later on.
Again, just in fairness to you, Ms Macrae, if we could have bundle 7 up, please, and looked at to page 56. This is the environmental matrix that was submitted by bidder C. So bundle 7, page 56. And we'll zoom in. It's very, very difficult to read the text, but you'll see in the third box along, there's department subgroup, and within that, there's PICU, 8 beds. And then in the room name function, the final entry is open plan bay 4. Do you see that?
Yeah.
If you look along to the ventilation parameters, they're the ones that the first figures that are marked up in red. You'll see under the heading supply air changes per hour that's been changed in red to 10. Yes. The value that was there. Again, just so I understand, your position is the fact that a bidder had taken this document and marked up values, that's not something that would leap off the page to you as being significant at this stage?
No. Well, they're just being proactive. I'm not aware if in the tender document they were required to do it prior to preferred bidder stage. But it's something that should have been done by all parties.
Because again, in fairness to you, I think you tell us very clearly in the statement that you hadn't been involved in drafting any of the procurement documentation. You weren't familiar with the content of it. And again, this isn't a criticism, but you were doing specific tasks that people asked you to do.
Correct, yes.
Do you remember within your time in the project an issue cropping up in relation to single bed rooms within the hospital?
Yes.
And can you just explain, we'll come on and look at some of the documentation, but in general terms, what was the issue that was identified?
The issue was that the bedroom ventilation was being described as positive to the ensuite. And that is not how the airflow is supposed to be categorised. The pressure regime from a single bedroom should be stated with relative to the adjacent space being a corridor. Because the ensuite, all en-suites have extract ventilation, which makes them negative pressurised to the room, the bedroom, hence making the bedroom positive pressure to the ensuite. That does not tell you what the pressure regime from the single room to the adjacent space, i.e. the corridor. You have no idea what that is. And that is the critical boundary for infection control.
And do you remember how that issue cropped up? Just again, thinking to the fact that if really it wasn't your role or perhaps Mott MacDonald's role to be undertaking detailed reviews of whether there's compliance with published guidance, how does that issue emerge?
That was because basically it was in the environmental matrix that the room was stated as positive to the ensuite.
And is this at the preferred bidder stage this is spotted, or had that issue been identified at an earlier stage?
That was at preferred bidder stage, yes.
But just in terms of the intensity of review that Mott MacDonald's undertaking, the types of tasks that are being passed to you, did that change in the period after when the preferred bidder is appointed?
I think the detail got more focused, but I as same, I was reviewing documents as they passed to me.
But when those documents were passed to you to review, issues like the single beds room issue got,
Yes.
got spotted. They've not been spotted, as I understand it, at the tender assessment stage because things are just too embryonic. But has it changed by the preferred bidder stage, the preferred bidder to financial close? Is there a more forensic analysis being undertaken by Mott MacDonald and by you in particular?
Probably yes, because we reviewing the different iterations of the environmental matrix, we were looking for anomalies between bedrooms, but it was done at a fairly high level.
We'll come on to talk about this in a bit more detail, but why is it being done at a very high level?
Well, essentially, the environmental matrix wasn't being updated as we would have, well, as I would have expected it, because there was several anomalies, and the project co didn't seem that they still claimed that their ventilation strategy was compliant.
Again, just so I'm understanding things, anomalies get spotted, they get fed back to the preferred bidder, and those issues don't get resolved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Was that a matter of concern to you as an engineer?
It got more concerning, but that development went past financial close. So the detail was still being developed after financial close.
In preferred bidder to financial close, did you have concerns about, I think what you've told us was a lack of response or lack of updating of the environmental matrix?
Yes.
Did you escalate those concerns?
Yeah. I know I did. I don't know whether it was done prior to financial close or after.
And in terms of the chain of command within Mott MacDonald, if you had concerns, who would you escalate those concerns to?
To Graham Greer.
To Graham Greer. I'd like to come back and just ask you a few more questions about the single bed ventilation issue that we've touched upon. And if I could ask you to have in front of you, please, within bundle 4, page 275. So bundle 4, page 275. Document headed in the top left-hand corner, environmental matrix comments, 13th of October 2014. Do you see that? Two columns. One, the board has the following initial technical comments on the draft 1 of the environmental matrix, and then we see the comments IHSL update 22nd October 2014. Do you see that?
Which item are you?
So I was just firstly asking that you've got that document in front of you, so the environmental matrix comments from the 13th of October. And the next question I was going to say is this a document that you've seen before?
Sure. I've seen it in looking up, preparing for today.
Okay.
It's not in a format that I recognise from the time of reviewing.
So in terms of a collation, if you had a comment, I think you said you would perhaps be working with Graham Greer, is that correct?
I recognise these comments.
Yes.
But not in this format.
Right.
So this is possibly a format that Camille's developed. But I do recognise the comments because theatre, DCN acute care, not included.
So you say you recognise the comments. Are that because they're your comments, or are these issues that you discussed with colleagues?
I think they are my comments.
But this isn't a document that was produced by you?
No.
Thank you. If we perhaps just look down onto page 276, do you see entry 7, bedrooms 4 air changes an hour, SHTM says 6 air changes an hour. I'll just give you a moment to bring that up. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says bedrooms 4 air changes an hour, SHTM says 6 air changes an hour, bedrooms have no extract, bedrooms en suite 10 air changes an hour, SHTM says 3 air changes an hour, bedroom stated as positive pressure, SHTM says 0 or negative pressure. The supply air to a bedroom has to be balanced with extract, and so it continues. Just in layman's terms, what's comment 7? What's that communicating?
That's indicating that basically I produced this to try to explain to my colleagues what was wrong with the ventilation strategy. And it's probably not laid out very well, but engineers always get criticised for that. So basically what we have there is a far higher extract rate from the ensuite, right? And the explanation for that is the bedroom having no extract. So if the bedroom has 6 air changes and the ensuite has 3 extract, there is a massive amount of air, excess air in the bedroom, and it's normal that it's extracted from the bedroom as well as the ensuite, because the bedroom extract is classified as clean extract, which can go to heat recovery, whereas the extract from the ensuite is deemed to be dirty extract and it goes outside with no heat recovery. And that was where the explanation for that was coming from.
And in relation to the pressure regime, balanced pressure regime, why are you flagging that?
Because that's where the infection control risk is. But the infection control risk and the pressure regime is dependent on the clinical function of the area.
So again, just so I'm understanding, within the comments here, we would see issues being recorded in terms of risks to infection prevention and control arising from potential non-compliance with published guidance.
Yes.
And that's being effectively fed back to the party that's been appointed as preferred bidder.
Yes.
Okay. Can you recall what happens in relation to this issue? What comes back from the preferred bidder when this issue's raised?
I think they still maintained, they thought that the opening window was the solution and complied with the guidance to give a balanced output.
Did you agree with that response?
No.
Why not?
Because the board had expressed a wish for the ventilation strategy not to include openable windows.
Do you know if this divergence in views got resolved?
I actually don't know. I know that there was a well past financial close, but there was a series of meetings to resolve the bedroom ventilation.
So again, just if we perhaps just stick with the period preferred bidder to financial close, as I understand it in terms of the chronology, you identify this issue, it's then raised with the preferred bidder, they provide a response which you don't accept from a technical issue in terms of addressing the infection prevention and control risk.
Yes.
Do you know what happens next in terms of whether that gets resolved?
Wallace Whittle said produced a ventilation strategies document, and we had a meeting where they maintained the strategy of openable windows, and my recollection was that it was rejected by NHS Lothian.
If I could just perhaps just go through a couple more of the documents, if I could ask you to have bundle 8 in front of you, please, at page 69. Bundle 8, page 69, which should be an email from Graham Greer to Brian Curry, dated the 13th of November 2014. Again, if we can zoom in, because the text's quite small. So you're copied into this email, but it's your colleague Graham Greer that's sending it. Begins, Brian, further to the environmental matrix meeting on Monday, please refer to the email below and attached that summarises the issue with the single bed ventilation. As discussed at the environmental matrix meeting, we added the following comment to the environmental matrix, and then you see the bullet point, detailed proposal awaited on bedroom ventilation to achieve balanced stroke negative pressure relative to corridor. However, this may come down to and dispute over the SHTM requirement stroke infection control requirements. Might be worth raising this again at the RDD meeting. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So again, just in terms of the chronology, is this what you're talking about in terms of the issue arises, there's the meeting to discuss it, but your understanding is it's not resolved, certainly at this point in time?
Correct.
Then if we look on to page 71, this is a note headed up single bed ventilation. You see that?
Yes.
And then just the final paragraph there, after setting out some of the detail, it states Mott MacDonald concern is that the room will be at a slight positive pressure relative to the corridor, which would allow infection such as MRSA or norovirus to spread. Do you see that?
Yes.
And was that your view at the time in terms of the problem with the proposal?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Again, just so I'm understanding this, so we're talking about the types of infection that you're concerned about is possibly things like MRSA or norovirus, but you're not aware of exactly how this issue that had been flagged gets resolved. You mentioned part of the proposed solution involved opening windows. And you tell us within your statement, I won't turn up the reference, but you tell us that your preference as an engineer would be to have all mechanical ventilation in a hospital. Can you just explain why do you say that from an engineering perspective?
From an engineering perspective, although I have said in the whole hospital, it's the clinical areas, because if you have natural ventilation, you have no control over the environment, the air change rate, or whatever. It just, in my view, it doesn't work. Hospitals that have natural ventilation, you find that they're very warm in the summer and cold in the winter. If you're relying on opening a window, control your air change rate. So by using mechanical control on the ventilation assures the air change rates.
And is that a view on which engineers might disagree? That's your view for the reasons you've articulated. Is there other engineers that might think natural ventilation or mixed mode was appropriate for various areas in a hospital?
For various reasons, the SHTM says natural ventilation is allowed, and designers use that to design. Obviously, there is a reduced cost for using natural ventilation, but from an operational perspective, in a clinical area, in a hospital, if you want to guarantee the environmental conditions, my view is it has to be mechanically ventilated.
And again, if we just going back to something that you'd mentioned slightly earlier in your evidence, just returning to this idea of the single bedroom, the ventilation, the pressure regimes, your recollection is that what NHS Lothian communicated to the preferred bidder was that for that space that there shouldn't be any openable windows, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, if we just look perhaps within bundle 8, please, to page 56. Bundle 8, page 56. You see an entry, read bedroom ventilation, HEI scribe confirmation. Do you see that? Have you seen this type of document before? Do you know what this is?
Is it just an email?
If you've not seen it before, please do say, Mr. Macrae.
I think I've seen it before.
Okay.
If you're asking what format the document is,
it's not a communication that's sent by you, so you may not have seen it before, but it looks like it might be an entry on the Conject system, which was used to convey information backwards and forwards.
It's offered something like Aconex.
Well, perhaps if you could just explain to the inquiry, what do you understand the Aconex system is?
Aconex was a database where correspondence could be passed back and forward and could be tracked. In fact, yes, I see the reference number is I can't remember, Brookfield Multiplex CE and an RFI number to it. So yes, that looks as though it's off of Aconex.
An Aconex being a method of communicating
yes,
between
the parties,
one side and the other. So this is an entry from the 29th of January 2015. The message begins, "Hi Ken, following your recent RFI, the board respond as follows. The single room with ensuite ventilation design shall comply with the parameters set out in SHTM 0301. Do you see that?
Yep.
Continues, the design solution should not rely in any way with the opening windows, as these will be opened or closed by patient choice. The critical factor from SHTM 0301 for infection control will be the resultant pressure within the room being balanced with or negative to the corridor." You see that?
Yes.
Is that, I appreciate that you didn't send this communication, but was that effectively your view on the solution and the conclusion that NHS Lothian came to in relation to what was being proposed?
Well, I don't know if it was my suggestion. I do know that the view within NHS Lothian was that ERI is natural ventilation, which has a very poor environmental result. And I think it was because of that they didn't want openable windows part of the ventilation strategy.
And again, just so I'm understanding, you tell us that you were passed documents for review. Do you recall whether or not this issue gets resolved at financial close and how the parties took account of such issues within the contract, or is that simply for others to deal with?
I think this issue was still in place through financial close.
The next document I'd ask to have in front of you, please, is in Bundle 10, Volume 1, at page 283. Bundle 10, Volume 1, at page 283. There's a document, top left-hand corner, healthcare associated infection system for controlling risk in the built environment, HAI Scribe. Do you remember during your involvement in the project being involved in any of these HAI Scribe reviews that would be conducted by NHS Lothian?
None at all. I was not at any HI Scribe meetings.
Okay, this isn't to try to catch out, but if we look on 2 pages to page 285, and I appreciate this is a long time ago, you'll see in section 2 there's a heading consultation. And then if you look 4 lines up from the bottom of that box, there's a reference to technical advisor Colin Macrae. Do you see
Yes.
that?
Yes.
There's a suggestion in a document a long time ago that you were consulted on an HEI Scribe review. Is your position simply you can't remember whether you were or you weren't?
Well, I have been shown this since in preparation for today, and I see this document. It does not appear to be a completed document. I believe it's still in draft format, but my comment would be about the consultation. That consultation may have been in the office just asking me about something, and I have not realised that that was being consulted on that for the HAI Scribe purpose.
So someone may have had a conversation with you,
Yes.
but you certainly don't remember being involved in a detailed
No.
HEI Scribe process. No. If I could just ask you for such comment as you can make to look on to page 286, please, and to paragraph 2.2. You see there's an entry in 2.2, is the ventilation system design fit for purpose given the potential for infection spread via ventilation systems? Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And the box is ticked as no. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
We can put that document to one side. Thank you, Mr. Macrae. Just drawing on your experience from mechanical and electrical engineering, one issue that the inquiry is grappling with is an environmental matrix which says 4 air changes an hour when the published guidance says 10 air changes an hour. Can you help the inquiry with what impact, if any, would it have from a mechanical and electrical engineering perspective if you were changing values in critical care rooms from 4 air changes an hour to 10 air changes per hour in terms of the design of the ventilation system?
Well, the design would have to be redone. The plant sizes, the duct sizes would all increase. It would be quite a costly exercise, an increase in cost.
If I could ask you to go back to your statement, please. So bundle 13, page 34, and if we could look towards the bottom of paragraph 58. It's on page 34. So I'd like to pick matters up in the final paragraph on page 34. About halfway down that paragraph, there's a sentence 3 lines in from the right-hand side beginning, it was up to the preferred bidder. Just take a moment and let me know when you found that. So it's in the final paragraph, about halfway up, 3 words in from the right-hand side, it was up to the preferred bidder. Just a couple of lines below the bold text. It was up to the preferred bidder to produce the design. You see that? Did you find that passage, Mr. Macrae, beginning with "it was up to the preferred bidder"?
Yes,
You tell us in your statement, it was up to the preferred bidder to produce the design and to ensure it complied with the BCRs. I understood from colleagues such as Graham Greer that the preferred bidder was reminded that they had this responsibility. Obviously, this is a conversation you had with Graham Greer a long time ago, but I think that issue may be controversial in terms of other witnesses. Can you, just to the best of your recollection, tell the inquiry, what was it Graham Greer was discussing with you in terms of what he was telling the preferred bidder?
basically the matrix wasn't complying with the SHTM.
And was there any discussion between yourself and Mr. Greer as to what he had told the preferred bidder they had to do?
I'm not aware of that.
You continue within your statement, so we're still on paragraph 34 of bundle 13. I've been asked to comment on whether the issues with air change would have been spotted when room data sheets were produced. My recollection is that room data sheets were not made available to me for review prior to financial close. Issues with air changes might have been spotted when room data sheets were produced. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Again, just so I'm understanding things correctly, in terms of the tasks you're being asked to do, no one is providing you with room data sheets to review in the
No.
period prior to financial close. Is that correct?
Correct.
But you think there's a possibility, if room data sheets had been produced and if they had been provided to you to review before financial close, you might have spotted some of the discrepancies
Yes.
between the environmental matrix as at financial close and the published guidance in guidance such as SHTM 0301.
Yes.
Now, would it surprise you to know that room data sheets for a range of rooms, including critical care rooms, had been produced by IHSL in the period prior to financial close?
I wasn't aware of that.
But again, given the role that you had, would that surprise you that they had been produced and they hadn't been provided to you for review?
If I wasn't aware they existed, then I wouldn't be surprised. Would I? So, if I didn't know they existed, then I wouldn't be expected to see them.
Again, this is really what I'm trying to tease out. It probably wasn't a well-phrased question, but you get to financial close and you've got the environmental matrix that you've reviewed. Is that right? You've not been provided with any room data sheets at that point. Okay. Does that surprise you? I think in terms of the chronology, in terms of, you told us at the start of your evidence, you get an environmental matrix and then at some point you get the room data sheets. I'm trying to work out if you found it surprising by financial close when the contract's being signed that someone hasn't said, you've got the environmental matrix that you've reviewed, here's some room data sheets to review as well. Did that surprise you?
I didn't get room data sheets to review.
That's the point. You didn't get them. So did it surprise you that you hadn't got them to review?
No.
Why not?
I didn't know they existed.
Right. Would you have expected them to exist at that point in time?
No. I would have expected them to be produced once the design of the facility had been completed.
Sorry, my fault. If I followed your answer, you were not surprised that you'd not been provided with room data sheets before financial close.
I was not surprised, but I didn't know they existed.
Now, I think Mr. McGregor then asked the question, did you expect them to have been available before financial close? And you answer that no. Let me just tease that one out.
Yes, what I think it's probably been a series of badly phrased questions on my part, but as I understand it, your evidence was you weren't given any room data sheets to review, and you quite fairly say, well, if I didn't know they existed, then why would I be surprised? I think the issue that I was trying to tease out with you is whether that's a surprising thing. So you tell us at the start, I get the environmental matrix, that's what I expect to see. At some point, there will be room data sheets.
Well through the construction period, I was given a full set of room data sheets to do a check against the environmental matrix, but it was well through the construction period.
That's not happening before the contract's signed.
Correct.
And again, just drawing on your experience in the industry, is that surprising in any way?
No, that happened in Fife. The room data sheets came out during the build period. Once the building design had been finalised, because even through the construction, and one example that I remember was the Fife Hospital had a medical assessment unit and it had a surgical assessment unit. And through the build, those two departments were merged into a combined assessment unit. And so the layout of that whole area, that floor, was subject to a change, but it had to be changed. And you expect that process to continue through the build period.
The next thing that I want to ask you about is the process that you're adopting whenever you're given a task such as reviewing the environmental matrix. You tell us within your statement that you weren't doing a line-by-line review. I think you describe it as spot checks that you were doing.
Yes.
Again, can you just help the inquiry with why are you doing spot checks as opposed to doing a full audit of the environmental matrix?
A line-by-line review would be time-consuming and very onerous, and it was the development of the environmental matrix was beyond financial close. I think it was Rev 10 was to be a line-by-line review by Wallace Whittle.
Within your statement, you describe it as being a very big job.
Yes.
And am I correct in thinking you're saying it's such a big job, it's not appropriate to do that before you sign the contract? You would do that at some point after you sign the contract?
That's not an opinion I have. I wouldn't expect the detail in the environmental matrix to be finalised at financial close, because there will inevitably be changes that will occur through a construction phase.
Again, just so I'm understanding, you don't have the design fixed at financial close, so it would be a waste of time to do the detailed review. You wait until the point in the project after financial close when the design is fully set, and then you would do a line-by-line review. Am I understanding you correctly?
That is when when the room data sheets would be finalised.
Macrae, there's just one final issue that I would want to ask you about at the minute. NHS Lothian's position before the inquiry is that there was effectively a transcription error within the environmental matrix, which doesn't get picked up. Do you think, in terms of your involvement in the project, whenever you come in during the procurement exercise through to financial close, that there were any issues that could have been improved upon to try to avoid that type of issue cropping up on future projects of this nature?
But the biggest problem with these type of projects, in my opinion, is that the guidance is too open to interpretation. And the table of rooms within SHTMO 301 is not comprehensive enough and doesn't detail the different clinical needs or patient needs, i.e. if you've got critical care, there may be a different factor involved in an adult's critical care to children's critical care, but also that the terminology of those rooms, where it's a critical care area, and in the past, that critical care area was like a Nightingale ward, where it was an open plan area, and to prevent infection control, 10-year changes would be appropriate. When you come down to the modern critical care, where there are individual bedrooms, it may be relevant to reduce the airflow because you don't have the infection control risk because you have the boundaries of the room. So it's my view, to stop this happening again, it's improve the guidance.
Thank you, Mr. Macrae, for answering my questions. I don't have any further questions at this stage. Lord Brodie may have questions, or equally there might be questions from core participants, but thank you.
I don't think I have any questions at this stage, Mr. Macrae. What I'm going to do is take a brief break to allow those in the room to consider whether they might have any questions. So what I'll ask is that you be returned to the witness room. What I have in mind is that we'll be able to tell you one way or the other in about 10 or 15 minutes. So if I could ask for your patience for just what I hope quite a short period of time. So thank you, Kirsten. We'll rise for about 10 or 15 minutes.
Please stand.
Mr. McGregor.
Lord Brother, there's just one point of clarification that I've been asked to raise with Mr Macrae. I don't think it would be controversial. So it's really just one very minor point, and I think that would conclude
you're
as evidence.
content to deal with
I'm
it?
content to deal with.
Mr. Macrae, I think there's perhaps just one matter or no more than two matters that, that Mr. McGregor would wish to ask you about. Okay. Mr. McGregor.
Mr Macrae, it's just really a point of detail. You remember that when you were giving evidence, you mentioned the fact that the design was changing, so you wouldn't expect a detailed audit of the design to be taking place until the point that it was fixed, which in your evidence was after financial close. Presumably you'd agree that the guidance at all those points of the project, particularly the published guidance SHTM 0301, it was fixed, it wasn't changing as the project developed.
I missed some of that. Turned my hearing aids down again.
Can I just say, Mr. McRae, I wear hearing aids myself, and I'm very conscious of the I'm very conscious of the problems of the technology. So you've got your hearing aids, but it's a question of just ramping them up a bit.
Sorry. Okay.
You said
Sorry?
I'm informed if you change your hearing aid to T, it should catch into the audio loop.
For NHS hearing aids, they don't have that function.
So, sorry, was I picking it up correctly? You can moderate the hearing aid with your phone.
Yes.
Have you been able to do that?
I've just done it, yes.
Right.
Thank you, Mr Macrae. I was just saying that you'd given evidence about how the design changed over time.
Yes.
That continued after financial close, and you would say that there shouldn't be a detailed audit or a line-by-line review until the design is fully fixed.
Correct.
The simple point that I was wanting to put to you was, during that design journey, the development, the underlying published guidance such as SHTM 0301, it's fixed, it's not changing, is that correct?
It's fixed. The only yes, it's fixed because the guidance is fixed, and even if the SHTM changes through the construction period, it is still the guidance at the time of financial close that takes precedent.
Thank you very much, Mr Macrae. I don't have any further questions. Lord Brodie may, or equally there might be applications from corporate.
I have no questions, and I take it that has dealt with the matter that was raised. Mr. Macrae, your evidence is now at an end. You're free to go, but can I thank you both for your attendance this morning and the background work of preparing to give that evidence, which I appreciate is more than a matter of just turning up on a morning. So thank you very much, Mr. Macrae, and you'll be.
Thank you.
As I understand matters, Mr. McGregor, that is the evidence for today.
Yes, Miller, that would be the witnesses for today. It will be Mr. Serkis and Mr. Ballantyne tomorrow. I anticipate that timings may be similar to today, so I have tried to arrange for Mr. Ballantyne to be available earlier than the afternoon slot to try to make best use of the time available.
And we'll sit at 10, or endeavour to do so. Thank you very much. We'll see each other, all being well, at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
please stand.